What if I told you the reason your life feels stuck isn't because of bad luck, or other people, or even your circumstances, but because you keep choosing comfort over courage? Be honest. How many moments have you delayed what matters most because it was inconvenient, uncomfortable, or unfamiliar? How many times have you told yourself, "not yet," when you should have said now? That hesitation, it burns. It tears at your potential from the inside out. The Stoics called it resistance, the silent enemy. And yet here we are, still postponing our becoming, still convincing ourselves that tomorrow will save us from the truth we're too afraid to face today. But you already know. Tomorrow is the lie that buries the person you were meant to be. If something in you feels shaken right now, then lean into it. Also consider subscribing as a quiet act of rebellion, a signal to yourself that you refuse to sleepwalk through life, that you're ready to think, to grow, to live deliberately. You don't run out of time all at once. It slips through you quietly, lost in moments when you say later, in promises you never keep to yourself, in all the invisible seconds you trade for nothing. We trick ourselves into believing that the future is a wide, open field, waiting patiently for us to show up. But it's not. The future is just a shadow. And every time you postpone action, every time you wait for better timing, you hand over a piece of your life to that shadow. Seneca once said, "Fools are always getting ready to live." And you can feel the sting of that when you think about how many of your dreams have been shelved, not because they were impossible, but because you never made them urgent. You didn't say no to them. You just didn't say yes. Not yet. Not now. Maybe someday. But someday is not a plan. It's an illusion. And deep down, we all know that. We wait for conditions to improve, for fear to fade, for motivation to arrive. But those things never come together perfectly. They never will. The Stoics understood that life doesn't pause for your convenience. It doesn't give you the luxury of clarity before action. Life asks you to move first, to act while unsure, to leap even while your hands are shaking. Because chaos is not a distraction from your path, it is the path. You don't find peace by removing disorder. You find it by standing upright in the middle of it, deciding who you are going to be anyway. Waiting for life to calm down is like waiting for the ocean to stop moving before you swim. You've already missed moments that mattered. You've already buried parts of yourself under layers of hesitation. But what matters is what you do now. Not next week, not next year. Now. Because if you keep living like time is on your side, you'll blink and realize it never was. All the things you were getting ready for, those become regrets. The chapters you never wrote, the words you never spoke, the changes you never made. They'll visit you in quiet moments, not to punish you, but to remind you that you were capable, that it was always possible, you just didn't begin. Urgency isn't panic, it's presence. It's the ability to see that this moment, this ordinary second, is charged with opportunity. Marcus Aurelius woke up every day and reminded himself that life is brief. Not because he was obsessed with death, but because he was obsessed with meaning. He knew that if you treat time like it's unlimited, you'll waste it like it's worthless. So he chose to live with intensity, with direction, not rushing, but not sleeping through his own life either. He wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." That's not dark. That's clarity. That's a compass pointing you away from delay and toward presence. And it's not just about big goals. It's about little choices. The call you've been meaning to make. The project you've been avoiding. The truth you've been withholding. Those things are waiting on you. Not your schedule. Not your circumstances. You. And you are capable of more than you think, once you stop negotiating with your fear and start respecting your time. Because every excuse is just fear dressed up as logic. And once you see through it, you can't unsee it. You realize that most of your waiting is just avoiding. Most of your hesitation is just protection, keeping you from failure, from rejection, from discomfort. But those are the very things that sculpt you. Epictetus once said, "How long are you going to wait before you demand the best of yourself?" That question is not a critique. It's an invitation, a line in the sand. Because this isn't about being perfect, it's about being honest. Honest about how long you've been making promises to yourself that you never intended to keep. Honest about how long you've been rehearsing for a life you never actually step into. Honest about how much time you think you have and how much you're really willing to waste. No one can answer that for you. No one can force urgency into your soul. But once it hits you, once you understand that this is it, that this is all there is, it changes how you move. You stop delaying. You start living. Carl Jung once said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." And that's the hardest truth, because it means you're not your intentions. You're not your plans or your dreams or your potential. You are only what you choose to act on. Everything else is just noise. And that's why the lie of later is so dangerous. It gives you the illusion of motion while you're standing still. It tricks your mind into believing that progress is being made, even as you lose days to the fog of indecision. But when you break free from that illusion, when you stop delaying to live, you find something powerful: momentum. Momentum makes change possible. It breaks inertia. It opens doors you never knew were there. But you only get it by starting, right now, exactly where you are, without needing more time, more energy, or more certainty. Plato once warned that the greatest mistake in life is believing you have time. And yet, we all believe it, until it runs out. So ask yourself, honestly, what are you waiting for? What exactly are you hoping will arrive before you finally give yourself permission to begin? Because nothing's coming. There's no perfect sign, no final confirmation, just this moment, just this breath, just this choice. And it's more than enough to start. There's something inside you that convinces you to pause when you should move. It doesn't scream. It doesn't argue. It just waits for the right moment to whisper, "Later." And because it's quiet, because it sounds so rational, you believe it. You mistake it for self-care. You think it's caution, strategy, thoughtfulness. But it's not. It's resistance. And resistance isn't trying to help you. It's trying to delay you. Slowly, silently. It doesn't need to defeat you in one grand moment. All it needs is to convince you to wait a little longer, to let this hour pass untouched, to let one more day drift by without action. And eventually it wins, not by overpowering you, but by making you forget how powerful you are. This force doesn't show up with flashing signs. It disguises itself as logic. It says, "You're not ready. There's still more to learn. Let's just think this through a bit longer." And so you sit, you prepare. You make plans you never act on. You build routines you don't follow. And the truth is, it's easier that way. It's easier to sit in the comfort of preparation than it is to face the discomfort of becoming. But preparation without movement becomes paralysis. You keep circling the idea of change, and with every circle you dig a deeper hole that feels harder to climb out of. Marcus Aurelius wasn't immune to this either. He wrote, "You could be good today, but you choose tomorrow." That sentence doesn't carry judgment. It carries clarity. He knew what it felt like to wake up and be tempted by the warmth of inaction, to wrestle with the same inner voice that tells you to wait. But he also knew that this resistance loses its grip the moment you act. Even a small step weakens it. A single decision in your favor becomes a spark that pushes the fog back. And that spark is always within reach. If you stop negotiating with the voice that wants you to stay still, the longer you let resistance call the shots, the heavier everything becomes. Your thoughts start to feel like weights. Simple tasks begin to feel impossible. You lose trust in your own word, not because you're incapable, but because you've made silence a habit. The good news is that the way back is always the same. It's not a breakthrough. It's not inspiration. It's action. Even messy, awkward, incomplete action has the power to shift your entire state. And the second you move, the second you begin, that fog starts to lift. The resistance loses oxygen because it cannot survive in movement. It only lives in stillness. You have to stop thinking that resistance will go away on its own. It doesn't dissolve with time. It hardens. It finds new disguises. It adapts. And the more you feed it with delay, the more control it takes. But when you move, when you do the thing anyway, even with doubt in your bones, you remind yourself who's in charge. That's how you build discipline, not by waiting for the mood to change, but by acting despite the mood. You learn to say, "I hear you," to that whisper, "but I'm not listening today." Carl Jung understood this dynamic deeply. He said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." When you keep running from effort, from discomfort, from uncertainty, it doesn't just stay there, it multiplies. That's why small decisions matter so much. You think skipping one thing doesn't count. You think hitting snooze once, canceling once, breaking your word just once won't have consequences, but resistance feeds on just once. It uses that as proof that it can creep in again tomorrow. That's why the fight is always now. Not in some dramatic showdown, but in the tiny, quiet moments where you choose to show up instead of sit out. The hardest part of breaking resistance is that it feels like you have to be perfect, but you don't. You just have to begin. The pressure to do it right is another disguise resistance uses to keep you from doing it at all. It tells you that if it's not perfect, it's not worth doing. That if you don't feel 100% confident, it's better to wait. And that lie keeps more people stuck than failure ever could, because failure at least comes from effort. But perfectionism? That's just elegant avoidance. You won't feel ready. Most of the time you won't even feel motivated, but you don't need readiness to begin. You need movement. The feeling of progress will always follow action, not the other way around. That's what the Stoics trained for. They didn't expect to feel invincible. They expected resistance, and they moved anyway. They taught themselves to recognize that inner voice, not as truth, but as noise. And the moment you learn to see resistance clearly, you can stop giving it so much power. Epictetus once said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." That sounds simple, and it is, but it's not easy. You can know what kind of person you want to be for years and never take the first step. Because resistance doesn't attack your vision, it attacks your ability to follow through. It tells you stories about how hard it will be, how unworthy you are, how others are already ahead of you. But when you act, you don't just break those stories, you write new ones. So the question is not whether resistance is there. It is. It always will be. The question is, are you willing to act before it wins again? Because once you begin, even with trembling hands, even with a racing mind, you are no longer the one being pulled. You are the one pulling forward. And from there, everything begins to change. There's a strange kind of pressure we put on ourselves, the need to comment, to judge, to declare how we feel about every little thing that crosses our path. It's subtle, but constant. Someone says something rude, and we immediately label it as disrespect. Something doesn't go our way, and we call it unfair. We see a person succeed, and we instantly form a thought about whether they deserve it. This inner commentary is relentless. And it's not just noise, it's weight. Every opinion you form, every judgment you make adds something extra for your mind to carry, and over time, all those layers become exhausting. What if you didn't need to carry all that? Marcus Aurelius offered something radical in its simplicity. You always have the power to have no opinion. Not because the world doesn't matter, not because nothing is important, but because peace begins when you stop reacting to everything. It's not a denial of truth, it's an act of strength. It's the ability to stand in the middle of life's chaos and not be yanked around by every stimulus. You see something, you hear something, you feel the tug, but instead of immediately assigning meaning, you pause, you breathe, you let it pass, and in that pause, you reclaim control. It's a discipline, and like all disciplines, it's uncomfortable at first. You'll feel the reflex rising inside you, especially when something feels personal. Someone cuts you off. A friend disappoints you. A stranger online says something ignorant. Your chest tightens. Your mind races to make sense of it. But what if, just for a moment, you let it be? No narrative, no label, just a thing that happened. Not every comment requires a response. Not every emotion needs to become a belief, and not everything unpleasant needs to become a problem to solve. Most of your emotional exhaustion doesn't come from what happens to you. It comes from what you tell yourself about what happens to you. That's the real source of tension. Life throws something your way, and instead of accepting it for what it is, you wrap it in meaning. This shouldn't have happened. They shouldn't have said that. Why me? The Stoics knew this spiral well. They didn't argue with life. They trained themselves to see things as they are, not as they felt in the moment. Because when you start seeing reality without the fog of judgment, you start thinking clearly. You don't have to become cold to become still. This isn't about detaching from life or pretending nothing matters. It's about engaging without clinging, observing without drowning, responding without overreacting. There's a softness to this kind of strength, a quiet confidence that doesn't feel the need to correct everything or prove a point, that doesn't need to be seen reacting in order to feel real. This strength says, I don't need to have an opinion to have value. I don't need to add noise to feel alive. And when you start practicing this, truly practicing it, you begin to notice something else. Your energy returns. The fatigue that used to sit heavy in your chest starts to fade, because you're no longer spending mental currency on things that never deserved it. You're not replaying conversations in your head, rewriting outcomes, anticipating judgments. You're just here, fully in the moment, fully yourself. And that is a rare kind of freedom. Epictetus reminds us that it's not things that upset us, but our opinions about things. And this truth, though ancient, feels painfully modern. Scroll through your feed, and you'll see people drowning in opinions. Everyone has something to say, about everything, all the time. And the louder it gets, the harder it becomes to hear yourself think. But the Stoics didn't live like that. They didn't chase outrage. They didn't perform righteousness. They chose silence where others chose noise, and that silence wasn't empty, it was spacious. It gave them room to breathe, to reflect, to choose their next move wisely. You can do that too. You can build that kind of space into your life. The next time you feel the urge to react, to speak, to judge, pause. Ask yourself, is this opinion necessary? Will it bring peace or just more noise? And if it's just noise, let it go. Not because you're avoiding conflict, but because you've decided your inner peace is worth more than being right. that your focus is more valuable than winning every debate, that your time is better spent building something real than tearing apart something temporary. Seneca once said, "He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." When you carry unnecessary opinions, you suffer before life even gives you a reason to. You anticipate problems, you create tension that never needed to exist, and you rob yourself of the stillness that would have helped you navigate it all. But you can change that. You can take back your mind by refusing to let it be pulled in every direction. Let people talk. Let them be wrong. Let situations unfold without your interpretations stamped all over them. That's not weakness. That's mastery. To remain calm in the presence of noise. To remain kind in the presence of cruelty. To remain clear in the presence of chaos. That's what Stoicism offers. Not escape, but endurance. Not detachment, but discernment. Socrates believed that the unexamined life is not worth living. But there's a difference between examining life and overthinking it to death. One creates clarity, the other creates confusion. And sometimes, clarity comes not from thinking more, but from thinking less. From choosing silence over commentary, stillness over reaction, presence over analysis. You're allowed to sit with something without rushing to name it. You're allowed to feel something without turning it into a story. You're allowed to let the world be what it is without twisting yourself up, trying to control it. And when you begin to live like that, when you stop giving your opinions the final word, you might just hear something else underneath the noise. Your own peace, finally breathing again. There's a silence that follows grief, one that no words can really fill. It doesn't announce itself with drama or clarity. It just arrives, quietly, and stays. Some days it feels like a weight pressing on your chest. Other days, like an emptiness behind your eyes. You move, you speak, you laugh even, but something within you has been fundamentally rearranged, and the world doesn't pause for you. It keeps spinning, as if it didn't just lose someone irreplaceable. But you feel the absence in every ordinary moment, and in that stillness, in that ache, you start to see things differently. The Stoics believed grief wasn't something to escape. It was something to honor, not by drowning in it, but by using it. They didn't hide from death. They didn't paint it as a tragedy. They understood it as nature, as structure, as part of the deal. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that everyone he loved would die, not because he was morbid, but because he wanted to love them fiercely while they were still here. To remember what mattered before time made it impossible to go back. Death was the teacher, and grief was its messenger. So if you've lost someone and it cracked something inside you, that's not brokenness. That's an opening, a space where memory and meaning can grow, and you don't heal by sealing it shut. You heal by letting it breathe. You heal by transforming that pain into presence. Every act of kindness you do in their name keeps them alive in the only way that really counts, not as an idea, but as an influence, as a living force that flows through your voice, your choices, your character. You don't have to get over it. The idea that closure means forgetting is shallow and false. You carry them. You continue them. You give them shape in the way you live. If they were patient, be patient. If they were honest, speak with that same clarity. If they were strong in quiet ways, let your silence be strong too. Because you aren't meant to stay the same after loss. You're meant to become something more. Grief doesn't just strip things away, it offers something too. A depth, a sharpness, a reminder that none of this is forever, and that's what makes it beautiful. Carl Jung said, "Only the wounded physician heals." And maybe that's what grief really does. It wounds you, yes, but it also makes you capable of healing others in a way you never could before. You start to see pain in other people's eyes differently. You become slower to judge, quicker to forgive, more present in conversations that used to feel small. And when someone tells you they're hurting, you listen without fixing, because now you understand that some things aren't meant to be fixed, they're meant to be carried. And some days, the sadness will sneak back in, a sound, a smell, a memory, and that's okay. That's not weakness returning, it's love resurfacing. It's the soul reminding you that what you lost still matters, that it's still shaping you, that it's still here in the ways that count. The Stoics didn't cry out against loss. They leaned into it. They allowed it to humble them, to strip away what was unnecessary, and to point them back to what was essential. Seneca said, "He who fears death will never do anything worth of a man who is alive." He understood that fear of loss makes us timid, but acceptance of it makes us courageous. When you know that everything can be taken, you start holding everything differently. You stop clinging to perfection. You stop wasting time pretending you have forever, and you start pouring yourself into the things that outlast the body: honor, presence, character, love. Let grief be your guide, not your jailer. Let it take your hand and lead you deeper into life, not further away from it. Let it make you more alive, not less. Because the pain you feel isn't just about death, it's about meaning. It's a sign that something mattered deeply. And that depth doesn't disappear. It gets reshaped. It gets repurposed. And when you allow that process, you become something stronger, not harder, not colder, but more capable of love that doesn't depend on guarantees. Epictetus said, "Never say of anything, 'I have lost it,' but only, 'I have given it back.'" There's wisdom in that, a kind of sacred humility. You don't own anyone, not their time, not their presence. You're given the privilege of knowing them, walking beside them, learning from them, and when they're gone, you don't lose that. You return it to the world. You take what they gave you, and you give it again, through your words, your choices, your love. It's not easy. Nothing worth living for is. But every time you choose to let your love turn into action instead of sorrow, you keep their light burning. And it's not about being cheerful. It's not about pretending you're okay. It's about honoring the gift of their life by refusing to numb yourself to your own. It's about living in such a way that if they could see you now, they would recognize themselves in what you've become. Plato believed that the soul is immortal, that it transcends the body. But even if you don't hold that belief, there's a kind of immortality in memory, in values, in transformation. When you allow their influence to guide your life, they don't disappear. They evolve through you. That's not fantasy. That's responsibility. That's what grief asks of us, not to move on, but to move forward, carrying what cannot be replaced. And as you walk, remember this: you're not alone in the ache. Every person you pass has lost someone. Every quiet stare on a bus, every distracted face in a cafe, every tired soul behind a counter, they're all carrying something too. And sometimes your story will help them find words for theirs. Sometimes your healing will give them permission to begin their own. Grief, when used well, is not a burden. It's a kind of compass, one that points not to despair, but to depth, one that doesn't erase the pain, but transforms it into something useful, something sacred. So if you've lost someone, don't let that loss shrink you. Let it shape you. Let it stretch your capacity for love, for presence, for courage. And know that in doing so, you're keeping them alive in the most meaningful way possible, not in memory alone, but in movement, in the choices you make, in the life you build. There's a moment each morning that feels small, but isn't. It's that space between sleep and decision, between rolling over and rising up. And what you do with that moment tells you everything you need to know about who's in control, the part of you that wants comfort, or the part of you that wants to grow. On some days, getting up feels easy. On others, it feels like dragging 1,000 pounds of doubt behind you. But the truth is, your progress will never depend on how you feel. It will depend on what you choose. The Stoics didn't sit around waiting for inspiration to arrive like a divine visitor. They acted, they moved, and they trained themselves to rely on effort, not emotion. Waiting for motivation is one of the most dangerous habits we've normalized. It convinces you that effort must be earned by feeling ready, but readiness is unreliable. It's inconsistent. And when your life is built around the moments when you happen to feel inspired, you surrender all your power to chance. That's not strength. That's slavery to your moods. The Stoics lived in a time of chaos, loss, violence, and political betrayal, yet they found a way to act with consistency and calm. They weren't superhuman. They were simply committed to something more permanent than mood, principle. You don't have to feel powerful to act powerfully. In fact, most days you won't. You'll feel tired, frustrated, uncertain. But every time you choose movement in the face of that, you redefine yourself. You create a track record of decisions that prove you are not at the mercy of how you feel. And that kind of proof builds something stronger than inspiration ever could. Trust. You begin to trust your own word, your own rhythm. You stop needing to feel amazing to do something meaningful. And that shift is everything. Sometimes the smallest movement breaks the biggest spell. A walk around the block, 5 deep breaths, standing up when you want to lie down. These things don't look like much, but they're statements. They're declarations of who's in charge. And when you choose to act, especially when it feels pointless, you plant a flag in the ground. You say, I am not waiting anymore, I'm moving now. And in that movement, the fog starts to lift. You remember what it feels like to be your own force. There's dignity in effort, not just in the outcome, but in the choice itself. That's what the Stoics knew. That effort is its own reward, that showing up, no matter how small the step, creates clarity. Action reveals what thinking can't. You realize the weight you thought was permanent was just inertia, and inertia loses its power the moment you decide to take the first step, even if your legs are shaky, even if your mind protests. Because action isn't just a behavior, it's a belief. It's the belief that you're not done, that something inside you still wants to fight. That motion is medicine, not just for the body, but for the soul. Aristotle said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. And habit is formed not through intensity, but through repetition. You don't have to crush it every day. You don't have to set records. You just have to keep showing up. And every time you do, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, you build a rhythm that doesn't depend on mood. You become reliable to yourself. And that reliability becomes confidence, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that says, I've been here before. I can do this again. There's a voice that will always tell you to rest, to wait, to slow down. And sometimes, yes, rest is wise. Sometimes stillness is sacred. But not when it's avoidance, not when it's hiding, not when it's wrapped in stories about how you'll get to it later. Later is the fantasy. Now is the fire. The only real change happens when you stop asking how you feel and start asking what matters. What matters is progress. What matters is integrity. What matters is keeping your promises to yourself when no one else is watching. Epictetus believed that self-discipline was freedom. Not restriction, freedom. Because when you learn to move on your own command, you stop being pushed around by impulse. You stop needing the world to be perfect for you to act. You stop needing someone to inspire you. And that kind of independence is rare. It's powerful. It's what allows you to move when others freeze, to build when others break, to lead when others wait. So the next time you feel stuck, move. Not because you're inspired, but because you're alive. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. Move before you're ready. Move while it's uncomfortable. Move like your future depends on it, because it does. Every time you choose discipline over delay, you pull yourself closer to the life you say you want. And the more you do it, the less you need to convince yourself. You just become it. Not all at once, but piece by piece, step by step, movement over mood, every time. Every morning you wake up incomplete, not broken, not flawed, just unfinished. There's something you don't yet know, something you haven't yet understood, a piece of the puzzle you haven't turned over. And the difference between drifting through the day or moving with purpose often comes down to whether you're willing to seek that piece. Wisdom doesn't arrive in your life like a lightning bolt. It unfolds, quietly, layer by layer, and if you don't go looking for it, you'll miss it. That's why learning isn't just something you do when you're young. It's not a phase. It's the lifeblood of a meaningful life. The Stoics knew this. They weren't obsessed with knowledge to impress people. They were obsessed with it because they understood how much pain comes from not knowing who you are or how to live. Most people read to escape. The wise read to prepare. They don't collect quotes for their Instagram bios. They test them in the fire of their own lives. They don't worship books as trophies. They use them as tools. There's a world of difference between being informed and being transformed. And the bridge between the two is application. Reading without reflection is like sharpening a blade you never use. It gives the illusion of progress without the result. But when you wrestle with an idea, when you let it disturb you, question you, stretch you, that's when it starts to change you. Carl Jung once said, "Enlightenment is not imagining figures of light, but making the darkness conscious." And that darkness, that hidden place inside you, doesn't come to the surface without a fight. That fight happens in study, in silence, in that uncomfortable moment where a piece of wisdom forces you to admit you've been living the wrong way. You see yourself clearly, and it hurts. But that clarity is where strength begins. That's where ego falls away and growth steps in. And the more you lean into that discomfort, the more capable you become of facing the world, not with arrogance, but with grounded truth. Learning like your life depends on it means reading things that challenge your worldview, not flatter it. It means journaling when you'd rather distract yourself. It means staying with a question longer than is comfortable. It means returning to the same page again and again until the words no longer sound wise. They sound familiar, like something you've lived, something you now carry, not just in your head, but in your bones. Seneca said, "While we teach, we learn." That wasn't a declaration of superiority, it was humility, a reminder that we're always in process, that wisdom isn't something you collect and store. It's something you earn by revisiting it under new light, new pain, new failure. When you reread something you once thought you understood and suddenly it hits you differently, that's learning, that's progress. Not because the words changed, but because you did. Because you now have the scars to see what you missed the first time. But even learning can become a trap if you're not careful. There's a version of it that feels productive, but isn't. A kind of self-help addiction that convinces you to keep consuming, keep highlighting, keep saving, but never implementing. The Stoics would call that a waste. Knowledge hoarded is weight. Knowledge applied is strength. You don't need to memorize every book. You need to live a few good truths so deeply that people feel them when you walk in the room. That kind of wisdom doesn't require much, just presence, repetition, and the courage to let what you know become who you are. Epictetus believed that books are like a gym for the mind. Not a performance space, but a training ground. You don't go there to impress. You go there to sweat, to stumble, to build resilience. That's how you should approach learning, not as a way to sound clever, but as a way to think clearly when everything around you is falling apart. That kind of thinking, steady, grounded, informed, is rare, but it's within reach if you commit to it daily. And don't underestimate the power of repetition, reading the same book again, writing about the same theme in your journal, coming back to a quote that hasn't stopped echoing in your mind. Repetition isn't redundancy, it's refinement. It's how you move from surface understanding to deep integration. It's how you stop needing the book to remind you, because now it lives inside you. Plato believed that learning is a kind of remembering, that the soul already knows the truth, and study is how we uncover it. Whether you see it as uncovering or discovering doesn't really matter. What matters is that you never stop searching, because the moment you stop learning, you start decaying. Not physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. You become rigid, fixed, predictable. But the learner remains soft, curious, willing to change, willing to begin again. That's why it's not about reading everything. It's about reading wisely, reading with purpose, letting what's important disrupt your comfort, letting it question your values, your habits, your excuses. And when it does, don't run from that tension. Lean in, write it down, test it, and above all, use it, because you don't need more content. You need more commitment. Commitment to growth, to truth, to becoming someone your younger self would admire and your older self would thank. You're not finished. Not today. Not ever. And that's not a burden. It's a gift. A reminder that life is still inviting you to learn, still offering you tools, still calling you to sharpen your sword and use it, not against others, but against your own chaos, your own illusions, your own resistance. Learn like your life depends on it, because in many ways it does. The quality of your mind is shaped less by what you're born with and more by what you consistently allow into it. People talk about protecting their time, their money, their energy, but very few guard the gates of their attention. And yet, what you give your attention to is what your mind becomes. Not in theory, but in fact. You can tell yourself that your social media habits don't affect your focus, that the endless outrage doesn't change your mood, that the shallow noise doesn't weaken your thinking, but they do. Little by little, they color everything. The Stoics didn't just warn about chaos in the world. They warned about the subtle corruption of the mind when you stop choosing what to let in. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed by the color of its thoughts." That wasn't a poetic metaphor, it was a warning. If you let gossip, conflict, vanity, and superficial drama fill your thoughts, don't be surprised when you start seeing life through a darker lens, because your thoughts aren't private passengers, they're paint. They stain how you see the world, how you treat people, and how you respond to challenge. And you can't wash that off with one good book or one inspiring quote. That kind of stain needs conscious, deliberate cleansing. You can't change your life without first changing the environment you expose your mind to. What you scroll past matters. What you listen to in the background matters. The voices you let into your head, through books, music, news, conversations, shape your inner dialogue. They build your reflexes. They teach you what to expect from the world. And more importantly, they teach you what to expect from yourself. If all you consume is entertainment built on chaos, comparison, and cheap dopamine, don't be surprised when your mind begins to reflect that. When your standards drop, when your peace disappears, when your focus fractures, because your mind is not a fortress, it's a sponge, and it soaks up whatever you leave it near. The Stoics chose their influences carefully. They returned to a few core texts, a few reliable minds, and reread them often, not because they were stuck in the past, but because they understood the danger of unfiltered noise. They weren't afraid of the world, but they weren't careless with their inner space either. They knew how fragile the mind could be, how easily swayed, and rather than trying to be immune to influence, they controlled the input. They didn't let just anyone or anything live rent-free in their consciousness. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And that's what most modern inputs offer: distraction from the hard work of becoming. That's why the endless feed is so addictive. It keeps your mind just busy enough to avoid stillness. Stillness is uncomfortable because it forces you to see yourself, your fear, your anger, your disappointment, your contradictions. But that's also where your transformation waits. Not in the scrolling, not in the arguing, but in the silence that allows truth to rise. When was the last time you chose to consume something that challenged you rather than comforted you? When was the last time you sat with a thinker who made you feel slightly dumb, not to humiliate you, but to stretch you? The Stoics called this kind of influence philosophical companionship, spending time with the dead, reading not to escape, but to wrestle, to provoke, to evolve. And they didn't consume this kind of wisdom once. They made it part of their rhythm, because they knew that your default environment will not elevate you, the culture will not save you, the algorithm will not train your soul. That responsibility is yours. Seneca advised that we return to a few great minds often, not because we should worship them, but because repetition deepens understanding. You don't just read wisdom, you marinate in it. You read it again when you're angry. You read it again when you've failed. You read it again when you think you've outgrown it, and it hits you in a new way. That's not passive learning, that's conscious nourishment. And your mind, like your body, needs consistent nourishment, not empty calories, not noise, but dense, living truth. You need to treat your attention like currency, not a casual swipe, but a sacred offering. Where you place it matters. If you give it to people who complain constantly, guess what becomes your emotional language? If you give it to people who gossip, who obsess over superficial drama, who thrive on negativity, you begin to speak that language too, even if you don't realize it. Influence works slowly, like water on stone, but given enough time, it reshapes everything. Epictetus believed that we become like those we admire, that our character reflects the company we keep, even if that company is digital, distant, or dead. And that means you can choose who you become by curating who you listen to. It means you can break patterns of self-doubt, victimhood, distraction, and fear, not by force, but by feeding yourself something different, something honest, something clear. This isn't about isolation, it's about intention. You don't need to run from the world, you just need to stop opening the front door of your mind to everything that knocks. You can listen selectively. You can mute things that don't serve your growth. You can leave conversations that poison your focus. You can build a library of thinkers, speakers, and writers who keep your standards high, not because they're perfect, but because they remind you of who you're trying to become. Plato warned us that the mind is like a chariot pulled by wild horses, our desires, emotions, instincts, always pulling us in opposite directions. But the charioteer, the reasoning soul, must learn to steer. That image still holds, especially now, because your inner world is constantly being pulled by news, by trends, by judgment, by urgency. But if you remember who's holding the reins, you can take back the direction of your thoughts. You can stop being led and start leading yourself. Every moment you spend feeding your mind with depth, with wisdom, with real clarity, you are voting for a better version of yourself. And every moment spent drowning in noise is a vote for stagnation. It's not about guilt, it's about awareness. because you can't afford to go numb anymore. Not if you want to live deliberately, not if you want peace, not if you want to leave this life knowing you paid attention to what actually mattered. So start filtering, start curating, start listening with your future in mind, and remember, your soul is always becoming, it's always coloring itself. The only question is, what palette are you giving it? There's something about the word later that feels harmless. It gives us the illusion of space, the comfort of delay. It softens the urgency of the moment and wraps it in a lie that whispers, there's still time. But the truth is, you were never promised later. Not next year, not next month, not even tomorrow. And that isn't something to fear, it's something to face. The Stoics didn't dwell on death to be dramatic. They kept it close because it kept them honest. They looked at it directly so they could live more clearly. Memento mori. Remember, you will die. And remembering doesn't steal life from you, it gives it back. There's a clock ticking, quietly, invisibly behind everything you do. Every minute you spend waiting, every word you withhold, every dream you postpone, those are moments you're handing over to death. Not in one grand gesture, but in a slow surrender, and most people don't notice it until it's too late. They think they're managing time, when really, time is managing them. The days pass, not with loud alarms, but in silence, one choice at a time, one excuse at a time, until they look back and realize they were always planning to live, but never actually did. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." And that line strikes at something many of us avoid. We don't fear death as much as we fear wasted life. That quiet ache that creeps in when you know you're capable of more but keeps saying, "Not yet." The ache that tells you the person you were supposed to become is still waiting behind the decisions you refuse to make. Death is not the thief. Delay is. What would change if you knew your expiration date? What would matter more? What would fall away instantly? The trivial arguments, the scrolling, the self-doubt, the approval-seeking, it all starts to look small when you remember the clock. The question isn't whether you have time. The question is what you're doing with the time you have. And more often than not, what you're doing reveals what you truly value, no matter what you say your priorities are. You can't fake it. Your calendar doesn't lie. Your attention doesn't lie. Your actions are a mirror, and sometimes what they reflect is uncomfortable. But discomfort can be a gift. Carl Jung once said, "Life calls not for perfection, but for completeness." And completeness doesn't come from avoiding death. It comes from integrating it, from living in a way that doesn't try to outrun the end, but makes peace with it. It's knowing that every conversation could be your last, every sunrise could be your final chance to begin again. And instead of collapsing under that awareness, you rise because of it. You say the thing that needs to be said. You start the project you've been avoiding. You apologize, you forgive, you risk, not because you feel ready, but because you understand that waiting for readiness might mean waiting forever. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that he could leave life at any moment. That thought didn't depress him. It sharpened him. It made each gesture sacred, each decision weighty. And that's what makes this moment valuable. Not because it's convenient, but because it's irreplaceable. You've already spent thousands of hours you can't get back, but this one is still yours. And what you do with it matters far more than what you've done before, because the past can only inform you. This moment can transform you. You don't need a dramatic event to start living more urgently. You just need to stop pretending there's more time. Stop assuming you'll have another chance to love deeply, to speak honestly, to change directions. Stop assuming the people you care about will always be there. Stop assuming that your body will always cooperate, that opportunities will always circle back. Start treating your life like what it actually is, a one-time gift, unfolding in real time. Epictetus said, "You are a little soul carrying around a corpse." It sounds morbid, but it's liberating. Because once you realize the body is temporary, you stop living just to preserve it. You start using it. You stop obsessing over comfort and start chasing clarity. You stop hiding behind potential and start stepping into responsibility. And you begin to see each breath as something fragile, not guaranteed, and therefore precious. This isn't about fear, it's about fire, the kind that wakes you up, the kind that reminds you how quickly it could all slip away. And that's not meant to freeze you, it's meant to move you, to break the trance of later and bring you back to now. Because now is when everything actually happens. Not when you feel confident, not when the timing is perfect, not when other people understand, but now, in the mess, in the unknown, in the fragile beauty of this breath, this step, this second. Plato believed that philosophy was a preparation for death, not because life should be gloomy, but because living well requires the courage to face the end, to walk with the awareness that you're here temporarily, that your name will be forgotten, that your work will eventually fade, and that truth doesn't make life meaningless. It makes it immediate, intimate, urgent. You don't need more time. You need to treat time differently. You need to let death be your clock, your mirror, your motivation, not to rush you, but to realign you, to ask harder questions, to cut through the noise, to silence the voice that says, tomorrow, and replace it with the voice that says, if not now, when? Because this isn't a rehearsal. This is the show, the only one you get, and the worst thing you could do is spend it asleep. You were never promised a later. You were given this. One wild, unpredictable, beautiful chance to create, to connect, to leave something better than you found it. Don't waste it polishing your fear. Don't waste it trying to be liked. Don't waste it pretending you have all the time in the world. You don't. And that's why this matters. So when the day ends and you ask yourself, did I really live today? Let your answer be honest. Let it be something you're proud of. Let it reflect the kind of life that doesn't need more time, just more truth, more presence, more courage. Because in the end, that's what the Stoics taught us, not to chase immortality, but to live so completely that death has nothing left to take. You weren't born to wait. You were born to act, to grow, to become. And every second you choose presence over delay, you reclaim your life from the grip of fear. So don't look back with regret. Look forward with resolve. The path is yours, but only if you walk it. Watch one of the videos on the screen to keep going deeper. And thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal.